all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man at his time play many parts. I believe it is high time for me to introduce myself a bit. I had a rather normal and usual childhood. The only thing unusual was that I was good at studying, so to speak. I followed the most traditional pathway: a Protestant elementary school, a Catholic junior high school, and Taichung's first senior high school. From then on, I went to Chang'an Medical School, and I was studying there for 4 years before I quit. And while I was there, I was also in a rock band, naively believing that I could one day become a rock star, but unfortunately my talent wasn't musical. Staying in medical school for 4 years, I decided to change path to English literature. I stayed there for 3 years before I went to England to pursue my master's degree in Shakespeare. After that, I spent a couple of years interning at a local theatre company in London before I resumed my study at the PhD level, and again it was about Shakespeare. After that, I came back to Taiwan and worked in a cram school in my hometown Taichung for several years, and then I moved to Taipei, again working in a cram school, until I found this exciting venue online to have the fortune to meet with delightful people like you guys. That was the short version, but I believe that there are so many things missing in a short introduction without which my story will be incomplete. So, if you would indulge an aging vampire, I want to use this time and space to further illustrate the transitions between different phases of my life. Since a relatively young age, I have cultivated a strong interest in literature, but of course it began with Chinese literature and all of those martial arts novels. Those novels introduced me to a world so sensual and exciting that I found studying at school, especially the Chinese literature, a bit wanting. While I was enamored to those kind of reading, my parents didn't quite approve. I was kind of forced into abandoning my love for literature, but I would read during school. I would read at home when my parents weren't watching, but still at a young age, one has to conform, or else one would face severe punishment, right? The beating up was kind of nightmarish. However, I was pretty good at studying. I was pretty good at summarizing the contents of textbooks, and I was also quite determined, fueled by vanity alone. If one could get into a medical school, one could have a bright future, having everything that a society has to offer. I kind of naively believed that. So I worked very hard on studying. If I couldn't understand math, I would buy all the practices that I could find and then just memorize them all. I am not good at memorization, so it was particularly painful for me. And I think people can relate. When you are studying for something that you don't like, in order to have a seemingly lucrative job, seemingly stable future, it was not motivation strong enough or even convincing enough for a young boy as I was. It was also during high school that I think it was because that I was under so much pressure that I finally broke down. At the age of 17, I believe, I found that the Japanese visual kei genre, starting with bands like X Japan, Dion Gray, Maris Mizeru, La Renu, Gakuto, battle. Also later on, the Gazette, which is my favorite band right now. They provided me with a kind of fantasy world into which I could escape. In the thunderous guitars and drums, in the screaming vocals, in the lustrous world created by the lyrics and the melodies of a language that I didn't really understand at the time. I could find myself protected by the music and by all the theatricality, the sensuality of the music and the performances, so that I could temporarily forget that I was suffering, I was enduring the impositions of all these academic expectations forced upon me. It was by this kind of a subconscious endurance that I got through the high school and got into very good medical school in Taiwan, Chang'an University. But as soon as I stepped inside that university, I found that most of my classmates were much more talented than I was. They were also passionate about being doctors, about saving life. I could not put myself to believe that saving human life would be my calling. And also because I was so enamored to this genre of musical performances, I started a band outside of school. I found many good friends. Many of them are still making music. I will find time to introduce the works of my friends to you guys. These musicians became my dearest family. They could understand me. They taught me lessons more valuable than any textbook could. For instance, respect, for instance, love, for instance, the effort one must put into chasing one's dream. Now, I was the lead vocal. Yes, I could say that I was good at singing. At the time, I was also in charge of writing the lyrics. Now, after junior high school, I wasn't really in touch with the English language anymore. When I was little, I loved the American pop music, starting with hip-hop.
Now let me welcome everybody to the Wild Wild West, a state that's untouchable like Elliot.
And later on, electronic dance music. And some alternative music as well. But as I began to explore the Japanese culture and music, I kind of stopped listening to and using English, except for two things. First, the lyrics. I wrote most of my lyrics in English. And then second, since junior high school, I began to read the epics of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. I was fascinated by the scale of imagination and creativity of the ancient Greeks. In our language, literature was written mainly to complain about wars, the praises for a country, the values of Confucianism, and for patriotism, which I couldn't really relate to. I want adventures, I want magic, and I also want love. So I found those in Western literature and novels, but at a time when I was in a band, I used to spend an entire night at Eslitt bookstores because I didn't have the money to buy those books. I would spend nights after nights reading works from Dragonlance Chronicles, the Songs of Ice and Fire, and of course the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and such and such. I was more and more drawn to the literary world, the fantasy world. They would strengthen the safety net for me surviving in this cruel, cruel world. apart from my music. When the band was almost about to make a debut, it was when I realized that I couldn't continue to pretend that I could finish my medical study anymore. It was too difficult. Also, because of the nature of that time of the musical industry in Taiwan, we were kind of forced to drop all those theatricality and sensuality of heavy metal and visual kei. So I felt like the offer at that time from that company was kind of betrayal to what had supported me throughout all those years of suffering and struggle. So I decided to give it a try, to give English literature a try. And that's why I began to study English literature. From then on, studying became not a work, but a leisure. I would spend 12 hours at least studying English, reading literature, of course starting from Homer's epics to finally William Shakespeare. From the moment I began to read Hamlet, my life was irrevocably changed, ushered into a new phase, a new sphere, which would eventually lead me to England. I think I've talked enough for the day. Perhaps I should continue my stories the next time. And also, guys, your comments have been serving as inspirations for my works, for my projects. If you would like to ask me anything, please don't hesitate to leave your precious comment down below. See you in the next video. Life's but a walking shadow, the poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.